Hello and welcome to this round one of GP Turin, and it doesn't happen too often that we get to see a relatively recent Pro Tour winner in round one of a GP, but Samuele Estrati on the left of our screen, he's up against his countryman Alessandro Balboni, but Samuele, he's not been playing so much in the last few years, so didn't have any buys coming into this event, and we're going to get a chance to see what a Pro Tour winner brings to the round one here in Italy.
Yeah, I believe that was Pro Tour Philadelphia 2001, the very first modern Pro Tour, where he played Splinter Twin. Well regarded as an excellent player, but indeed, as you mentioned, hasn't been playing Magic that much lately. Then again, you never ever quit the game for good. So it's good to see him coming back at the GP level here.
And Ifnir Deadlands along with a Swamp signaling that we might be seeing a Zombies list from Estrati. Balboni, because he has got access to white mana as well, could be a few more options for him. He might be on a Vehicles build, he might be on a Black-White Zombies build. A few different options available to him here, but Balboni missing a third land drop, that not where you want to be. I mean, to be perfectly honest, you don't really want to be playing a Pro Tour winner in round one of a GP.
No, and also you don't want to be missing your third land drop in game one of the GP. Doesn't bode well, but at the same time, Estrati did not have a fast start either. Zombies is a fairly aggressive deck with lots of 1-drops and 2-drops. Estrati had none of those. He does have a Lord of the Accursed.
Yeah, Lord of the Accursed, nothing to pump just yet, but we recognize that that's probably a short-lived thing when it comes to zombies. And an Oath of Liliana coming from Alessandro Balboni. That a slightly unusual one, but perfectly apt for dealing with the first creature coming from Estrati.
Yeah, that might indicate that Balboni is on a Black-White Planeswalker deck, where Oath of Liliana may give him plenty of advantage over the course of a long game.
And now we get to start seeing the zombies trains get a rolling here for Estrati. Manages to get down a Crypt Breaker, a little late to the party, but still very much welcome, bringing along a zombie there thanks to the Digraph Colossus. And that means that all of a sudden, from an empty board, Estrati gets a relatively large number of zombies in play. Worth noting, though, he has got 2 copies of Ifnir Deadlands in play. The damage from that might add up.
Yeah, but Balboni isn't really attacking him yet, so it doesn't matter too much. But that was a great turn for Estrati. He just put 6 power on the battlefield, spread over 3 creatures. That's pretty good.
I like this. We apparently have a Liliana theme deck on Balboni's side of things. Alongside the Oath of Liliana, we have Liliana Last Hope. Dealing with Crypt Breaker, just such a gigantic source of card advantage. And then that zombie token from the second line on what your Oath of Liliana does. Planeswalker came into play. That means that Balboni gets a zombie.
Yep, and this is probably what this deck is designed to do. The Black-White Planeswalker deck that I mentioned. Play Oaths, play Planeswalkers, and exploit the synergy. And the zombie also means that unless Estrati has a removal spell for it, which he does, Balboni would be able to keep his Liliana around. But that Dark Salvation, that changes the equation. It's not only, well, basically a 2-for-1, kill a zombie, get a zombie, but it also means that the path is clear. Well, would have been, if not for the fatal push, to kill Liliana.
Yeah, Revolt was active there because there had already been a zombie killed off. If you know, they're not really killed, they were already dead, but taken off the battlefield. But that does mean that the attacks from Estrati, not enough to take down Liliana Last Hope. And Liliana having a nice target there in terms of the 1 toughness Wanderer that just came into play for Samuele Estrati here. So he is going to be able to continue ticking up the Planeswalker with some sort of useful effect here.
I assume it's gonna be ticking up to kill the Dread Wanderer. Estrati still has several cards in hand, so it'll be a while before he can get it back from the graveyard.
And here's Gideon. Right on the money when it came to those Planeswalkers. There is going to be another zombie coming along, but before the zombie, here's a Knight Ally token for Balboni. Gideon, Ally of Zendikar, one of the key cards from Battle for Zendikar that we're not going to be seeing in Standard for too much longer now.
Indeed. In about a month from now, let's see, September 29, then Ixalan will release. And that means that Battle for Zendikar block, as well as the
Shadows over Innistrad?
Shadows over Innistrad block, thank you, is going to rotate out, including Gideon. So Balboni making the best of the cards while he still can. Now what Estrati has in hand is a bunch of removal spells. This also explains why he didn't have a 1-drop or a 2-drop. He just kept the hand filled with a bunch of removal spells. This does mean that he can clear the way and then kill one of the Planeswalkers. My guess is that Gideon is a larger threat. It has more loyalty and, well, it's also more expensive. Its abilities are generally stronger. So I like taking out Gideon. But the Liliana is still around, and we'll see if Balboni perhaps is a replacement Gideon.
Yeah, Liliana has proven tenacious thus far with just enough in terms of removal to keep her safe. And there is the follow-up Gideon. I guess that's always the worry. Whichever one you kill off, it seems like they always seem to have the replacement. But it's, yeah, second verse, same as the first here when it comes to what Gideon's going to do. Making a Night Ally token, making a zombie token. That Oath of Liliana has done a lot of work this game.
Yeah, for sure. That's the third zombie. And it also obviously killed the creature when it came down. So, yep, not bad for a 3-mana card.
3 copies of If Near Deadlands now for Samuel Astrati. It's the sort of thing that he doesn't have too many double black costs, but something like that Grasp of Darkness does qualify. And a second Grasp of Darkness. All right, Gideon number 2 down.
Yep, and this may also turn on the Dread Wanderer in his graveyard for the next turn. Now, that's indeed a lot of removal spells. I assume that Astrati will actually board them out for game 2. They were fine in taking out some 2/2s, but not exactly what you want out of your cards.
Yeah, somehow or other it feels like Samuel Astrati has done an awful lot, but not necessarily achieved a great deal just yet. The extra value that the Oath of Liliana has produced really means that he's been having to fight the symptoms rather than the disease almost on the other side of the battlefield.
Yeah, Astrati has attacked for quite a bit of damage this game already, but he's only been attacking Planeswalkers. He kind of had to. Sometimes against Planeswalkers or a Planeswalker deck, you want to be attacking the player. Either to just try to go for the throat for the life total, or because you really expect that they have a replacement Planeswalker in hand. But given that it was so early in the game, where it's all about board advantage, Astrati just had to attack the Planeswalkers.
And this attack here still not quite killing off Liliana, thanks to the fact that she's shrunk down a zombie there. Yeah, and Astrati living off the top of his deck at this point.
And no response from Balboni, even though Balboni had several cards in hand. Which is interesting. Could be that, because Balboni surely doesn't have all lands in hand. He might just be sitting on a sweeper.
Fumigate is the sweeper that he was sitting on. Sat on it until the last moment. This the turn that he had to deploy it in order to actually make sure that he didn't lose his Liliana. Trying to get as much value as possible. And at the end of turn, that Westvale Abbey making a 1/1 Cleric Totem.
Yeah, the zombie deck can grind quite well in the late game. Against creature decks, those Ifnir Deadlands can help a bit. Not that relevant in this matchup, but the combination of, well, mainly Westvale Abbey, but potentially also the Dread Wanderers, mean that even though Astrati is pretty much out of cards, he will still be able to use his mana to advance his board.
And Liliana's Mastery there. If you want to advance your board, that's one way to do it.
Oh yeah.
A couple of zombie tokens. All his zombies getting +1/+1 also, so 6 extra power on the battlefield. One of the things I think is kind of cool about this standard format is that the way that the lands stack up, you can either choose to be lots of colors without too much penalty, or if you're a monocolor or close to monocolor deck, you get to have lots of extra utility from your lands, and that's what we see from Astrati here. Even though he's a mono-black deck, he's got the ability to remove creatures with his lands, he's got the ability to make creatures with his lands, and potentially even make Ormondal at some point.
Yeah, I just like it when you have these options in the mana base. It also gives an incentive to add more lands to your deck, which reduces the possibility that you don't draw enough lands. So it's just nice for deck building.
And still more removal keeping around Liliana here. Alessandro Balboni, it feels like he's got to be pretty happy with the position he's in here, because in addition to the fact that he's been able to keep a Planeswalker around for a long time, he's still got cards in hand.
Sure, but he isn't really getting anywhere yet. Also know that Liliana's Mastery means that the Dread Wanderer is now a 3/2, so it won't die to the Liliana activation. And yeah, Balboni so far has just been playing a couple of Planeswalkers and then all removal spells. That's fine, but he's just struggling to keep the board clear and keep his Planeswalkers around. As long as he doesn't put down some bigger win condition, eventually Astrati is gonna take over the game with say Westville Abbey.
Yet another removal spell here coming from Balboni.
That's a good one. Stasis Snare not only deals with the Dread Wanderer, but also means that it would be exiled. Oh, nice. Kill your own creature. I like it. Because what this does is that instead of the Dread Wanderer being exiled by the Stasis Snare, it goes to the graveyard, ready to, well, come back from the dead once again. Exactly what zombies like to do. And Fatal Push, it wouldn't have been doing all that much anyway. Maybe if Balboni made another Planeswalker, say Gideon, you can kill something, but I think Astrati is wise to realize that it's more valuable to just have the Dread Wanderer around as a recurring threat.
So cast out on the Liliana's Mastery, meaning that Liliana then was able to kill off Dread Wanderer. Astrati back to the top of his deck, looking for action.
Yeah, and now the way this game is looking, it seems like Balboni has the advantage, because Astrati can add one creature to the board per turn, either via Dread Wanderer or the Westville Abbey activation, but then Balboni can just kill it with the Liliana, and unless Astrati draws something relevant over the course of the next few turns, eventually Balboni is just going to be able to ultimate Liliana. And I don't think the zombies deck will be able to deal with an even bigger onslaught of zombies.
Yeah, in the zombie-on-zombie fight, whoever has the most zombies typically wins.
Yeah. Although now Astrati can activate the Westville Abbey and return Dread Wanderer at the same time every turn, which means that Balboni now needs something extra to deal with the creatures if he wants to be able to get up to the Liliana ultimate.
Well, he does. And so we will find out what extra he's working with soon enough. Just immediately says, I've got a Fatal Push, don't bother finding the token.
Yep, Balboni is on a plan. Indeed, if Balboni has another removal spell, then he can ultimate Liliana in 2 turns. So that is what this game may come down to.
Balboni there just updating his life total, because he did tap if near Deadlands to make that black mana for Fatal Push.
I mean, it doesn't matter all that much whether you're at 21 or 10 at this point.
It doesn't matter now.
That's true, that's true.
We want to try and keep these things square where we can.
At this point, the relevant number is the loyalty on Liliana.
Yeah, that's a pretty big number. Once you start having to find the die with more than 6 numbers on it for your Planeswalker, it's a happy place to be. And there's the Grasp of Darkness in order to kill off another Cleric. That likely means that Liliana's going to get a chance to go for her ultimate.
Yep, yeah, there are no haste creatures and zombies. And Astrati sees the writing on the wall. He's like, yep, that's 2 zombies here, and then even more. Nope, not going to beat it.
Alright, so these players will be going to their sideboard soon enough. How much do we think that this matchup's likely to change after sideboarding?
Well, I expect that Astrati will take out a bunch of his removal spells. Right in this game, he drew a lot of Fatal Pushes and Grasp of Darkness, which were not particularly effective. And he may have cards like discard spells or bigger threats, maybe recurring threats in his sideboard, all of which would be at least a huge improvement against the Game 1 configuration of Balboni. We don't have deck lists at this point. The judges have only collected them from the players a couple of minutes ago. So I don't know what Balboni has in his sideboard. But what you often see for these low creature amount decks is that they have a bunch of creatures in the sideboard. Perhaps stuff like Kalitas or might be Archangel Avacyn, ready to bring in when opponents, say, take out their Grasp of Darkness. Which would give Balboni an excellent way to improve against this potential Game 2 configuration of Astrati. So, depending on the sideboards, I would have to give a bit of an advantage to Astrati afterboard. He may definitely improve, but if Balboni can correctly anticipate what Astrati is doing and board accordingly, then it is possible that Balboni can easily take over a game with big, high-impact creatures, while Astrati is left without an answer.
Now, I guess that one extra factor in this entire little dance that these two are engaged in now is that Zombies is a fairly well understood and established deck, so Balboni probably going into his sideboarding with a fairly clear idea of what he wants to do.
Yeah.
Samuel Astrati is going into this match. Firstly, we know that he's not been playing quite so much Magic lately, hence the fact that he's on no buys at the moment. Also, the white-black Planeswalker deck, not necessarily what I would consider to be a mainstream tier 1 deck, so it's a little bit harder for even a player who was fully on top of the standard metagame to be able to fully predict what was going to be going on the other side of things. So Astrati kind of working on hard mode a little bit in that regard. We'll see how he's able to navigate those waters.
Yeah, that's a good point. Astrati will have to sideboard in the dark in a way, because white-black Planeswalkers, I haven't really seen it around much either, and if I were in Astrati's seat, I surely wouldn't be able to guess the full contents of Balboni's deck list. That's always an advantage of playing a deck that's a bit under the radar, but I also like seeing these decks around, because especially in recent weeks, Standard has been quite diverse. There have been a lot of possible archetypes. You can play a wide variety of decks, and of course, if you have the perfect deck for the metagame of the weekend, you can have an advantage. But perhaps Balboni is the type of player who has been playing with his Lilianas and Gideons for many months, perhaps over a year, and is just trying to leverage his experience with this archetype here. And well, the current standard certainly is a format where you can do that. So I like seeing this this variety of decks here.
And this is about as large as Standard is going to be for the foreseeable future. We're right before our set rotation. In fact, the bulk of the cards that Alessandro Balboni played in that first game will not be legal in Standard in a month or so. So this kind of the last hurrah for many of the Planeswalkers that he's looking at, unless he chooses to move into Modern with them. And actually, when you look at the cards that he's played, a large proportion of them pretty much good enough for Modern too. Yeah,
true. Yeah, we've seen Liliana, the Last Hope in Modern. Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. I have seen it, though not a popular inclusion. Out of Liliana, I don't think so yet, but
and then sort of Fatal Push and Grasp of Darkness that are just solid removal spells. I mean, Fatal Push, I think, probably likely to be one of the best black removal spells that we're likely to see anytime soon.
Yeah, it's one of the best in Modern right now. Also, certainly one of the best in Standard. But out of the cards you mentioned, I think that's the only one that is still going to be legal after the rotation. Liliana, Gideon, Ode of Liliana, not so much anymore. And that's a lot of pile shuffling here.
Yeah, these guys, it looks like we might have some mulligans going on between Astrati and Balboni.
Yep. But it's going to be a nice weekend filled with Magic. After our rounds end here in Turin, in Italy, we'll move you over to Washington, D.C., where there's also a Standard Grand Prix going on. So if you like to watch some Standard, basically the last GPs in this format, you can just stay behind your TV all weekend long. Yeah, nearly non-stop.
Yeah, realistically, if by the end of this weekend you don't feel like you've got a reasonable bead on what you can do in Standard, then there's nothing more we can do to help you. Jump on Magic Online and start playing. Play along. Why not? If you see a deck that you like the looks of, build it up, load it up, and get on playing. Crypt Breaker on turn 1 here from Samuel Astrati. This a little bit closer to the aggressive draws that we were talking about from Zombies. And the cool thing about Crypt Breaker, of course, being that it suddenly means that you have options in terms of how you want to play your early turns. Do you want to get a few early hits in, or do you want to draw cards? Do you want to make tokens? All sorts of options. It looks like on turn 2, Istrati is likely to be discarding something in order to make a zombie token.
Yep. Yeah, Crypt Breaker is just the premium 1-drop in zombies. It does it all, and Balboni better have a removal spell for it. Otherwise, it will likely threaten a card draw on the next turn, assuming that Istrati has another regular zombie to follow up on the next turn.
I believe I did see a Dread Wanderer sat in his hand, so that a potential play soon enough. A discard here just in order to produce a zombie token, and it's pretty common, I find, for the zombies decks, if they do get 3 zombies in play early game, to draw cards rather than try and just get a few hits in.
Yeah, the awkward thing about Dread Wanderer is that it enters tapped. So that means that it can be tapped for the Crypt Breaker ability to draw a card immediately.
Grasp of Darkness on a zombie token here. That a pretty aggressive deployment of removal from Balboni.
Also a bit of a surprising choice to me. I would have expected him to kill the Crypt Breaker, but perhaps he has Liliana, which would be able to take out the Crypt Breaker as well. In that case, his targeting choice would make sense. Because Crypt Breaker is surely the big threat on this table. Indeed, there is the Liliana.
Yeah, one way or another, this matchup all about various iterations of what Liliana's got going on in Standard at the moment.
The weird thing is that if Balboni targets the Crypt Breaker, then Istrati will make a token and then has 4 power to attack Liliana. If Balboni instead kills the Dread Wanderer, then Istrati will only have 3 power to attack Liliana, which means that Liliana will still be around for another activation, say on Crypt Breaker on the next turn. This is assuming that Istrati doesn't have a Lord of the Curse to pump his zombies on the next turn. So yeah, it's actually an interesting choice what you target here. Not so clear cut, and it may depend on your hand. Even though Crypt Breaker is the bigger threat on this board, just planning ahead for the next combat step and indeed taking out the Dread Wanderer, I like this play. Yeah.
I mean, I think if you're Balboni, you have to feel a little unlucky if the Lord of the Accursed comes down next turn, because on turn 3, when you've already got a Crypt Breaker in play and a zombie token, not casting a Lord of the Accursed would be a little unusual. Looks like there is a Relentless Dead in hand for Istrati. Relentless Dead, of course, a great way of getting back Crypt Breakers that have been killed off by conventional means.
Yeah, now Istrati also has a choice to make. Either send 3 power at Liliana, which is a Planeswalker, it's a threat on the table, you want to get it out, or draw a card with Crypt Breaker, both of which are appealing.
Now that Istrati has Relentless Dead in play, there's definitely also value in just keeping that last swamp untapped, so he gets to use one of the 2 triggers from Relentless Dead as and when it dies off.
And it looks like Istrati is valuing the ability to take out Liliana over just getting an extra card. And I can't fault him for that decision, seeing how the first game went, which eventually ended with a Liliana ultimate. So might as well get her off the table while you can.
So Balboni not missing a beat in terms of land drops here.
It's a Crook of Condemnation, the anti-graveyard card.
Makes sense. I mean, it's a sort of, the level of impact that it has against zombies is kind of interesting. It's not one of those cards that is going to completely break the matchup open, but when we look at the stuff that's going on for Istrati here, Relentless Dead, Dread Wanderer, Digraph Colossus, they do all consider the graveyard. And so Crook of Condemnation will certainly do work. I would be surprised if it was in Alessandro's sideboard principally for the zombies matchup, though.
No, I would expect it to be there mainly against the God Pharaoh's Gift deck. That's where you really need it. In this matchup, it's playable, but also not super amazing. Okay, so let's see.
Well, we've had a bit of a turn of play here just as we were looking at that, because first up, Liliana killed off for the first time in the matchup, and that a big deal for Samuel Estrati. He also next gets a chance to look at Balboni's hand and sees, well, not a whole lot. Once you take away that Grasp of Darkness, just lands in hand for Alessandro Balboni. So he's going to need to find something pretty fast. We might see that Crook of Condemnation gets cashed in fairly soon, just for a card if needed.
Well, if only you could get a card. It's not Relic of Progenitus, so when you sacrifice it, no card. Yeah, it doesn't really do much at this point, and Balboni is just left with lands mainly, whereas Estrati has, well, at least 4 power on the board. Relevantly, there is a Shambling Vent, so Shambling Vent can block the 2/2 zombie token. Relentless Lad with Menace can still attack though.
And Balboni just checking out the graveyard. There are some good ones in there. And wisely taking out creatures first. That means that Relentless Dead's ability not quite as potent.
It also helps against Diregraph Colossus, but I'm not sure I like this play so much, because it means that Balboni now doesn't have mana available to activate his Shambling Vent and block the zombie. This means that he takes 2 additional points of damage, whereas taking out the Crypt Breaker immediately also didn't seem particularly necessary.
Well, this time round Liliana's on the other side of things. Just upping her loyalty there without any targets. Doesn't particularly want to shrink any of his own zombies. And Alessandro Balboni cycles at the end of turn. The Cycling Deserts, we've not seen too much action from in Standard. But in Draft, very, very high picks as it turns out. Just greasing those wheels, keeping everything moving nicely.
Well, we've seen the 2-color Cycling Deserts do quite a lot of work. The Cycling Jewels, in a way. Unfortunately, those are only for allied color combinations, so not for black-white. So if your mana base is already good enough, yeah, you might as well add a couple of Cycling Deserts in a non-allied color combination. I don't see a big problem with that.
And Alessandro Balboni here electing to use his Shambling Vent aggressively. He's got Liliana to worry about, so knocks her down to 2 loyalty. If ever there's someone that respects the power of Liliana, it's the person that won the game with her in the previous game.
Oh, for sure.
But Estrati here doesn't necessarily need to extend too much more on the battlefield right now. Plays a land every turn because it certainly doesn't hurt to. Dark Salvation and so on, certainly not minding having a little bit more mana available.
No, but at this point I would have to give the edge to Balboni by a little bit. Balboni is not taking a lot of damage every turn, also given that he's gaining 2 life with Shambling Vent. In a few turns his Shambling Vents should be able to take out Liliana. And then his deck is probably just set up better for a long game.
Yeah, throwing out Fatal Push again. Balboni unafraid of using removal spells on tokens. Sometimes it can feel like kind of a bad deal. You're using a card to deal with not quite a card, if you will. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. And at this point, as you've said, if he can stay around for the medium to long term, then his deck should be well set up. So it's just a matter of doing what needs to be done to make sure that happens.
Yep. Ah.
Everyone gets a Liliana. This does, of course, mean that Samuela's Liliana will not be being attacked this turn, because that Shambling Vent coming into play tapped means that there's not enough mana to activate the creature land and actually attack with it.
Yep. Yeah, and it's important that Shambling Vents can't really be targeted by Liliana, or at least not being shrunk by Liliana. Speaking of Liliana, there's her Mastery.
This means that it's an attack for 3 on Balboni's Liliana.
And those 3/3s are pretty big on Estrati's side. Also importantly, they will be able to block the Shambling Vents.
Sorry, there was already an activation the other way
Yes.
round on that Relentless Dead, meaning that the attack was not for a full 3. Apologies on that one. Many creatures getting both pumped and indeed shrunk back down again on this battlefield.
So this game is getting fairly close. Fine. Not sure if there's a reason to play Cast Out immediately main phase.
It's something we saw Balboni
Feels-
do last game as well. In that case, it seemed to make sense because it meant that Liliana was killing something off immediately. That's not the case this time round.
Yeah, it feels a bit strange to me because Balboni could have activated a Shambling Vent, blocked one of the zombie tokens with it, and then tapped the blocking Shambling Vent along with 3 lands to play Cast Out on the Liliana's Mastery. I think that would have left him in a much better spot than the play that he made.
Yeah, as things stand, all the action on Estrati's side of things now, at least in terms of what's on the battlefield. He had a very high impact play in Liliana's Mastery to make zombie tokens last turn. Let's see what his follow-ups are in these next turns. Looks like there's a Dark Salvation in hand along with one other card.
I think that's Transgress the Mind, which is not particularly relevant when Balboni has no cards in hand. Yeah, at this point Estrati is squarely ahead. And I have to say that Crook of Condemnation hasn't really paid off for Balboni. Yeah, it has exiled a bunch of cards, and it might have been relevant if eventually Relentless Dead would have died. But none of that actually happened or made an impact. I think in general there's a bit of a risk with just boarding in cards that you feel like, well, they might do something. But it's possible that the cards that Balboni removed from his deck to put in the Crook of Condemnation could have actually have been better in this game or in this matchup.
Yeah, Crook of Condemnation, definitely a clever card, but sometimes you just need the blunt object.
Yeah. I mean, Zombies, it's a deck that can use the graveyard, but it doesn't necessarily need the graveyard. So, not sure if it is really what he needed here.
A whole lot of shambling coming on here from the side of the board that is not zombies. Those vents, though, they do a pretty good zombie impression with their shambles. Coming across at Liliana.
Meh. I'm not sure this is a great attack either, because Estrati can just double block one of the Shambling Vent with 2 zombie tokens. In that case, you trade a Shambling Vent for a 2/2 zombie token. That's not a particularly favorable trade. And Estrati has clear reign to attack on the next turn. If Balboni had instead just passed the turn, you know, say go, then Estrati would have had a bit more trouble perhaps, in that he wouldn't be able to attack all out for fear of a double block with the Shambling Vent.
So Transgress the Mind, clearing out Balboni's hand. I mean, I guess that being aggressive with Shambling Vent rather than defensive means that Liliana's +1 isn't doing quite as much. But given that you're losing a Shambling Vent either way...
Yeah. I mean, yes, it's true that Liliana's +1 didn't do all that much in this way, but yeah, you're still trading a Shambling Vent for a 2/2 zombie token, because in combat it's always the defender who has the advantage, and Estrati still had some untapped zombies.
So Estrati getting stuck in with one of his zombies here. Estrati, I think of him a large proportion of the time as being a control player, and I think that we're kind of seeing a little bit of that in the way that he's choosing to play out some of these turns here. He knows that he's got the advantage, but he doesn't necessarily need to be swinging with every single one of his creatures. He would rather be in a position where he can protect the queen, if you will, while meanwhile gradually whittling down Balboni. Balboni does have cards that can get him right back into this game. If he draws into a Fumigate, say, that's a potentially very big deal. There are other cards that, within the pantheon of things that could be played in black-white Planeswalkers, could change the face of a board very quickly indeed.
Yeah, exactly. I might have still been inclined to just swing all out last turn if I were in Estrati's position. Yeah, you can play it super slow and try to protect Liliana. But it's easily possible that Balboni has some big haymakers in his deck. You cannot give him infinite time.
And of course, speaking of infinite time, at the moment Balboni is leading 1-0, and when we look at our clock we see there's about 15 minutes left on the round. If Estrati does want to win 2-0, he's potentially going to have to pick up the pace a little bit here.
Well, this game may still be over pretty quickly. If Balboni doesn't find a good answer to the Liliana in, let's say, 2 turns, then he's gonna be on the receiving end of an ultimate this game. Just 2 more turns, and then the zombie horde will arrive.
I think that at least the sort of the flag bearers for that horde are already on the board in this instance. They're kind of going, it's coming, it's coming.
Yep.
And of course, Liliana's emblem, while it's very potent on an empty board, even more potent if you already have some zombies in play when it comes along.
Absolutely.
5 mana being tapped, that typically signaling something.
Well, it's just
pretty
near that
impactful.
lands.
Estrati here looking at a graveyard that has been fairly well Crooked Condemnation. Another Fatal Push dealing with a zombie token. Alessandro Balboni here pretty hesitant to actually kill off that Relentless Dead. It's been in play for a long while.
But at least now the Shambling Vent could attack.
Pretty important that it does. Liliana getting very close to the 7 loyalty that we see at the bottom of Liliana the Last Hope. That the sort of key impactful element here, because the +1 doesn't have too many targets a lot of the time. The -2, because there are so few creatures in the graveyard thanks to Crooked Condemnation, not doing a great deal. So it's really ultimate or nothing.
And finally the Crook of Condemnation has done something. It has taken, how long? 20 minutes? But, well, relevant here. Because now, Estrati does not have a blocker. So this means that Balboni can start attacking the Liliana, preventing the ultimate. So close! But looks like Liliana will not be able to produce some zombies. Not yet.
Shambling Vent also meaning that from this attack, both of these players, after however many turns that we're at, going to be over 20 life, or at least at 20 life.
Yeah, but as I mentioned, the life totals are not that relevant at this stage of the game. It's all about what's on the board. And yep, Balboni has swung back the game in his advantage. It's gonna take a while. 6 attacks before the Shambling Vent can actually take out the Liliana. At that point, Balboni will be up to 33 life. But it may do it. We haven't really seen any big win conditions from Balboni's deck yet. His mana base has done a lot of work, ranging from, you know, cycling lands to an Evening of Dead lands, but in particular these creature lands, the Shambling Vents. They've been one of the most important cards this entire game, but I think they're just pretty much the only threats we've seen from Balboni all game. Well, there we have a big one.
Yeah. Interesting here, though, it does mean that there's not enough mana to activate Shambling Vent. So it's been a little dance. We've had there was the turn that he had to attack Liliana, as it turns out, in order to be able to get things going, even though he lost Shambling Vent in the process. But a big play here from Samuel Estrati has removal spell in order to be able to deal with that copy of Kalatas, Traitor of Get.
Yeah, this is exactly what he was looking for. Any creature, so that he can turn on the Never to Return, because he weren't able to play it beforehand.
And as it turns out, Never to Return will never return because it got exiled with Crooked Condemnation. But now Liliana's at 7 loyalty. Now there's a Crypt Breaker in play.
Well, no, I don't think the Never to Return got exiled by the Crook. I think the return got flashbacked or aftermathed, but it only has one target. The target's the creature in the graveyard, and that was then exiled by Condemnation to counter the entire spell. So no zombie for Estrati for that reason.
Well, Declaration in Stone, just enough to deal with Crypt Breaker, meaning that Shambling Vent gets to attack Liliana down to 5 loyalty. We are still in this game. Alessandro Balboni, he took the first game with a Liliana ultimate. It took a bit of time. This time round, he shows a Fumigate that's getting hit by Transgress the Mind. Here's the follow-up Relentless Stead from Samuel Estrati. Estrati has to get the motor running if he's going to be able to win this match. Under 10 minutes left, and he's still a game down here.
Yeah, but Balboni still has the edge. Sure, Relentless Dead can jump block the Shambling Vent for a turn, but that's gonna be it. Ooh, and Gideon, that's a big draw. That definitely changes things.
Gideon comes along, 4 loyalty. Let's have a Night Ally token.
Yeah, Strati has no good way to take Gideon out, at least on this turn. He can attack it with Relentless Dead, but that doesn't really accomplish all that much. Yeah, and keeping... Yeah, this is actually way better. Keep back the Relentless Dead, so that you can chump block the Gideon, and the Night Ally token was shrunk. But then there's still the Shambling Vent coming through, so... Unless Estrati has an instant speed removal spell, that Liliana will go down lower than 7 loyalty once again for the for the 3rd time this game or whatever. It's been a close race around the Liliana ultimate, but it looks like Balboni has finally found a way to get ahead on board.
Yeah, Estrati showing that he has nothing but lands going on, scoops up his cards. Alessandro Balboni, I would hesitate to say that he did it the easy way. I mean, we didn't really see much in the way of big hitters, sort of the sorts of game enders that you sometimes would expect from control decks. But as it turns out, if you can keep a Planeswalker in play for long enough, then you're able to turn things around. And I think that there, obviously we saw Samuel Estrati conceding at 20 life. That was basically him saying, I'm all out of cards, you've got a threat on the board. I don't think that I'm going to be able to win the entire match from here.
Exactly. He had just no way of getting back from that position. Not when his Liliana would die on the next turn, and then he would be facing a Gideon, more cards from a deck that probably has a better late game. Might as well scoop it up and have some time to relax before the start of the next round.
All right, well, that is the end of our first live match here at Grand Prix Turin. Of course, there will